The summer of 2004 was suffocating in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets pulsated with the distant sounds of laughter, music, and the sizzle of food from sidewalk vendors. I was fresh out of college, seeking a fresh start in a city that promised adventure and new beginnings. But what I didn't expect was the unsettling encounter that would change my life forever. I worked part-time as a delivery driver for a local pizza joint. Sizzle and Slice. It was a gig that suited me perfectly, flexible hours and the chance to explore the city's hidden corners. My evenings were filled with navigating the streets, delivering hot pizzas to eager customers, and occasionally enjoying the late-night chatter with my coworkers. It was a mundane life, but the routine was comforting. One muggy evening, I received a call for delivery to a house nestled in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The address was unfamiliar, but the promise of a hefty tip motivated me to find it quickly. I loaded up the car with the order, 2 large pepperoni pizzas and a side of garlic knots, and set off into the twilight. As I drove deeper into the neighborhood, the streetlights flickered like distant stars, illuminating cracked sidewalks and overgrown lawns. The houses grew increasingly dilapidated, their windows like dark eyes watching my every move. I felt an inexplicable chill settle over me, but I dismissed it as nerves. After all, I was just delivering pizza. Arriving at the house, I parked in the driveway and grabbed the pizzas. The place looked abandoned at first glance, paint peeled off the walls, and weeds overtook the garden. But a flickering light in the front window suggested someone was home. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but the prospect of a generous tip urged me forward. I approached the door, and before I could knock, it creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, his gaunt figure illuminated by the dim light behind him. He wore a red baseball cap pulled low over his brow, casting a shadow across his face. His smile was unsettling, too wide, too eager. Come in, he urged, his voice thick with an odd enthusiasm. I've been waiting for this delivery all night. I just need to get your signature and take your payment, I replied, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Sure, but you should really come inside. It's much too hot out there, he insisted, stepping aside to reveal the cluttered interior of his home. Reluctantly, I stepped inside, the door closing ominously behind me. The inside was even more unsettling than the outside. The walls were lined with faded photographs, their subjects obscured by layers of dust. The air was stale, heavy with a mixture of old food and something else I couldn't quite place. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but the man's gaze held me captive. Let me get your money, he said, moving deeper into the house. I stood in the dimly lit foyer, the pizzas growing heavy in my hands. As I waited, the oddness of the situation began to weigh on me. The man returned, holding a wad of cash that he eagerly thrust into my hands. Here you go! Just what you deserve for this amazing meal. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. And you know what? You should join me for dinner. I've got some special sauce to try. No, thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I really should be going. I backed toward the door, but the man stepped in my way, blocking my exit. Nonsense! You can't leave yet. You've got to try it. Just a taste. He grinned, a manic gleam in his eye that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, I felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind that propels you to run. I pushed past him, throwing open the door and bolting into the night. The heat hit me like a wall, and I sprinted to my car, my heart racing. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped off, glancing in the rearview mirror to see the man standing in his doorway, his smile still plastered on his face. That night, I tried to convince myself it was just a bizarre encounter. I shared the story with my friends, who laughed it off as a harmless oddity. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lay beneath the surface. The man's eyes haunted me, their wildness echoing in my mind. As the days turned into weeks, the memory faded into the background, overshadowed by the rhythm of daily life. I continued my deliveries, but the experience lingered, a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Then, one fateful evening, I received another order to the same neighborhood. A chill raced down my spine, but I pushed through the unease. I had bills to pay. This time, I was determined to make the delivery and leave without incident. As I approached the house, a sense of dread washed over me. It looked even more decrepit than before, as if the shadows were creeping closer. I parked and approached the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could knock, the door swung open. The same man stood before me, his grin wider than ever. "You came back! I knew you would! Just here to deliver your pizza," I said, forcing a smile. I tried to step back, but he blocked my path again, the familiarity of the situation sending alarm bells ringing in my head. "Come inside, I've been preparing something special for you," he exclaimed, gesturing toward the darkness behind him. "No, I really can't. Just take your pizza and I'll be on my way," I insisted, my voice trembling. "Oh, but you're my guest! And guests must try my special sauce." His eyes glinted with an unsettling light, a hunger lurking just beneath the surface. Before I knew it, he had reached out, grabbing my wrist with a grip that was surprisingly strong. I panicked and yanked my arm free, backing away. "Please, just let me go." His expression shifted, the warmth of his smile turning icy. "You don't understand. You're already part of the meal." With a surge of adrenaline, I dashed past him, racing out of the house and into the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my keys. I was terrified, breathing heavily as I tore down the street, desperately trying to distance myself from that cursed place. But my relief was short-lived. The next few days brought a series of strange occurrences. I began to notice a pattern, news reports of missing persons in the area. Young people vanished without a trace, their faces plastered on lampposts and flyers. Each report sent a wave of nausea through me, a creeping realization that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and every flicker of movement made my heart race. I tried to rationalize it, paranoia from my experiences, or perhaps just the weight of the world closing in on me. But deep down, I knew I was connected to something sinister. One night, I received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but I could make out the words clearly. "You shouldn't have run away. You owe me a taste." My blood ran cold as I slammed the phone down, panic clawing at my throat. Desperate for answers, I confided in a friend, Sarah. We'd known each other since college, and she was always the one to ground me when my fears spiraled out of control. But even as I recounted my story, I could see the concern etched on her face. She suggested we investigate the neighborhood together. The following night, armed with flashlights and a heavy dose of courage, we drove to the area. The streets were eerily silent, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and the distant hum of cicadas. As we approached the man's house, the sense of dread grew stronger. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to know if he's connected to the missing people," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. We parked down the street and approached the house on foot. The windows were dark, but the flicker of a light caught my eye. My heart raced as we neared the door, the same feeling of terror washing over me. Suddenly, the door swung open, and the man stood there, his eyes wide with surprise. "Guests! How wonderful!" I froze, fear rooting me in place. Sarah grabbed my arm, whispering, "We need to leave." But the man laughed, an eerie sound that echoed in the stillness. "No one leaves once they've had a taste. Come inside, I've prepared something special." He stepped aside, revealing a room filled with grotesque decorations, photos of missing people, jars filled with strange liquids, and a table set for two. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fight or flight response kicked in, and I shoved past him, yanking Sarah along as we sprinted for the car. I could hear him laughing behind us, the sound following us like a haunting melody. We didn't stop driving until we reached the safety of a crowded diner in the heart of the city. The neon lights flickered, and the scent of greasy food filled the air, grounding me in reality. As we sat in a booth, my hands trembling, I struggled to process what had just happened. I think he's a cannibal. The words slipped from my lips, and even I struggled to believe them. Sarah's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and fear crossing her face. Derek, are you sure? Cannibals they're just something you read about in horror stories, she replied, her voice a tremor. I thought so too, but there's no denying it. The missing persons, those weren't just random disappearances. He's involved somehow. My mind raced with every detail of my encounters with the man. The way he had talked about food, how he insisted on sharing his special sauce. I felt nauseous just thinking about it. Sarah leaned back, her brows furrowing in thought. We need to report this. There's something very wrong here. I nodded, knowing she was right. But deep down, a nagging voice warned me that we were already in too deep. What if the authorities dismissed our claims? What if they were as skeptical as my friends had been? After much debate, we made our way to the nearest police station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as we explained everything to an officer. He listened with a skeptical expression, occasionally jotting down notes. I could see the doubt in his eyes. You say this man was smiling at you? He asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. And that he offered you pizza? Yes, but you don't understand. He's connected to those disappearances. I've seen his house. He's dangerous. My voice rose with frustration, but the officer simply nodded, his expression remaining neutral. I'll pass your information along, but unless you have solid evidence, there's not much we can do. It's a strange world out there, kid. He chuckled, shaking his head, leaving us to feel even more helpless. As we left the station, the weight of despair settled on my shoulders. What now? Sarah asked, her voice low. We keep investigating. We can't let this go, I replied, a sense of determination igniting within me. We had to find a way to expose the truth. Over the next few weeks, our lives revolved around gathering information. We combed through online forums, digging up old news articles and police reports about missing persons in Minneapolis. The names and faces blurred together, but one name kept surfacing: Michael Mick Patterson. He had been reported missing 3 years prior, and a few months later, another young man vanished under similar circumstances. A pattern emerged, and my gut twisted with dread. One rainy evening, Sarah and I decided to return to the neighborhood. Armed with flashlights and courage, we approached Mick's last known address, a place just 2 streets away from the man's house. The air was thick with tension as we stepped onto the cracked pavement. Do you really think we'll find anything? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. But if he's involved, maybe there's something left behind, I said, trying to convince myself. We walked carefully, flashlights sweeping over the darkened houses. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. As we approached Mick's house, my heart raced. It looked abandoned, just like the man's place. Overgrown weeds crept up the sides, and shattered windows gaped like empty sockets. We moved cautiously, glancing around for any signs of life. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping past the window. I motioned for Sarah to be quiet as we crept closer. The door was ajar, the darkness inviting yet foreboding. Should we go in? Sarah whispered, her breath hitching. Yes. We have to, I replied, steeling myself. We pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, echoing in the emptiness. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the scent of mold. We flicked on our flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness to reveal a living room filled with broken furniture and peeling wallpaper. Look! Sarah pointed to the wall, where a series of photographs were pinned up, images of missing people, each one marked with a date. My blood ran cold as I recognized Mick's face among them, his smile frozen in time. Beneath his picture was a handwritten note. Soon we'll dine together. I recoiled, horror flooding through me. This is it. He's connected. We need to leave, now. But before we could retreat, the sound of footsteps echoed from deeper within the house. Panic surged through me. I turned to grab Sarah's arm, but she was frozen, her eyes wide with terror. "Derek, look!" She pointed toward a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. It was the man, the pizza delivery guy. His smile stretched unnaturally wide, illuminated by the beam of our flashlights. "You shouldn't have come here," he exclaimed, stepping closer. "I was just preparing a feast." My instincts kicked in. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and sprinting for the door. We burst out into the rain-soaked night, adrenaline propelling us forward as we raced to my car. Once inside, we locked the doors and sped off, fear coursing through our veins. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "We need to get evidence, something concrete to show the police," I replied, my mind racing. "We have to go back to the man's house." That night I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sent me on high alert, and the shadow of the man haunted my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always just a step behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next evening, we gathered the courage to return to the man's house, this time equipped with a camera and a sense of urgency. The sun had set, and darkness enveloped the neighborhood like a shroud. We parked a few blocks away and walked cautiously, every sense heightened. As we approached, the flickering light from inside danced eerily against the walls. I could hear his voice, an unsettling sing-song quality to it. "Come on in, friends. I've been waiting for you." My stomach twisted in fear. I turned to Sarah. "We're going in. Just stick close to me, and we'll get the evidence we need." We stepped onto the porch, and as I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open, revealing the man once more. "You came back. This time, you must try the special sauce." His eyes gleamed with madness, and the smell of something rotten wafted through the doorway. I stepped inside, Sarah hesitating behind me. The interior was dimly lit, revealing the same grotesque decorations. "I just need to take a few pictures," I muttered, pointing the camera around the room. "Don't be rude, come to the table. Dinner is served." He gestured to the dining room, where a table was set with dishes that looked disturbingly inviting. My stomach churned as I fought the urge to vomit. We'll just take a look around, thanks," I stammered, trying to maintain my composure. But the man's expression darkened. "Once you've tasted it, you can never leave." His voice turned sinister, and he lunged toward us. We bolted down the hallway, adrenaline propelling us as we raced through the house. We could hear him behind us, footsteps pounding on the wooden floors, echoing with our frantic breaths. Just as we reached the door, I turned to grab Sarah's hand. "Go, go, go!" We burst outside into the night, the fresh air hitting us like a wave. I scrambled into the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. We sped away, leaving the man behind, but not without a lingering sense of dread. After finally reaching a safe distance, I pulled over and took a deep breath, my heart racing. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We take this evidence to the police. They have to believe us now," I replied, resolve settling in my chest. As I drove toward the station, I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on us. We arrived at the police station, adrenaline still coursing through our veins. I parked the car, and together, we stepped inside, the fluorescent lights illuminating the somber atmosphere. We approached the front desk, and the same officer from before greeted us with a raised eyebrow. "Back again?" I didn't waste any time. "We have evidence now. Pictures of the man, the missing persons, everything." I handed over my camera, my heart racing with anticipation. The officer took the camera, his skepticism still apparent. He clicked through the images, and the smile faded from his face. "I'll need to call in some detectives," he finally said, his tone shifting. As we waited, a cold sweat trickled down my back. It wasn't long before a detective arrived, a no-nonsense look in his eyes. "I hear you've got something important?" We shared our story again, this time with the evidence to back it up. As I spoke, I felt a mix of hope and dread. Would they take us seriously this time? After examining the photos and taking our statements, the detective's expression turned grave. "We'll send officers to investigate. If what you say is true, We may be dealing with a serious criminal. For the next few days, I waited anxiously for news, my heart heavy with fear. Each time the phone rang, I jumped, wondering if it would bring news of an arrest or worse. The waiting was unbearable. Every noise felt amplified in the silence of my home. Every shadow seemed to lurk just out of sight. Finally, on the third day, my phone rang. It was the detective. "Derek? We found something," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Can you come down to the station?" The dread that had been building in my stomach turned to cold fear as I replied, "Of course. I'll be there right away." I grabbed my jacket and rushed out the door, my heart racing. When I arrived at the station, the detective was waiting for me in an office. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "We've got some troubling news." "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "After you reported your suspicions, we sent a team to the man's house. What we found was—" He paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It's worse than we expected." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The detective leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "We discovered human remains buried in the backyard. He's been luring people in and—" His voice broke for a moment, and he took a breath before continuing. "He's been killing them. We found several bodies, all tied to the cases you mentioned." I felt the world tilt beneath me, nausea washing over me. It was real. Everything I feared had come true. The man was a murderer, a cannibal, and he had been living just down the street. "He's in custody now, but we need your help identifying the bodies," the detective said, his expression grave. "It's crucial we determine how many victims he's had." "Of course," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "I'll do anything I can to help." The detective led me to a small room where the remains were laid out, covered respectfully with sheets. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me like a weight. Each face I looked at could belong to someone's loved one, someone who had disappeared without a trace. As I uncovered each sheet, my heart broke a little more. I recognized some of the faces from the missing persons reports. They were young, full of potential and dreams, now reduced to mere remnants of what they once were. I had been living in the same neighborhood as their killer, blind to the horrors that had taken place. After hours of identification, I stumbled out of the room, my mind reeling. I couldn't shake the images from my head, the faces of the victims, their eyes forever frozen in fear. It was a nightmare I wouldn't soon escape. "Derek," the detective said, catching up to me. "You did well. This information will help us build a case against him." I nodded, feeling a hollow sense of accomplishment. Yes, we had caught him, but the damage was done. The fear that had settled in my bones was there to stay. Weeks turned into months as the investigation unfolded. The man, identified as Richard Ashford, had been a local fixture, known for his charming demeanor and impeccable manners. No one had suspected him. How could they? As his trial approached, I found it increasingly difficult to cope with the reality of what had happened. I tried to return to normalcy, but each time I walked down the street, I could feel eyes watching me. I felt hunted. The man had been arrested, but his presence lingered like a foul stench. Sarah became my lifeline. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, sharing our fears and uncertainties. One evening, as we sat in my living room, I expressed my worries. "What if he gets out? What if there are others like him?" She squeezed my hand, her grip firm. "We can't let fear control us, Derek. He may be behind bars, but we have to remember the importance of speaking out. This shouldn't happen to anyone else." Her words resonated with me, and I knew she was right. I had to turn this experience into something positive. With Sarah's encouragement, I started a support group for victims' families and survivors. Together, we worked to raise awareness about the dangers of ignoring the signs, of not speaking up when something feels wrong. The trial was a surreal experience, one that I approached with a mixture of dread and determination. As I sat in the courtroom, facing the man who had turned my life upside down, my stomach churned. He looked different, the charm that had once disarmed so many now replaced by a cold, calculating demeanor. The weight of the evidence stacked against him was insurmountable, yet I could see the flicker of defiance in his eyes. As the prosecution presented their case, I felt a rush of anger rise within me. Each witness who took the stand shared their stories of loved ones lost, lives shattered. I was there not just for myself but for them, for those who could no longer speak for themselves. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of every victim's name resting on my shoulders. I recounted my experiences, from the first encounter at the pizza shop to the horrifying discovery in the man's house. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. "Why do you think he chose you?" the prosecutor asked, his gaze intense. I took a deep breath, fighting back the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. "I think he saw me as an easy target. Someone who wouldn't be believed. But he underestimated the power of speaking out." The trial culminated in a guilty verdict, and Richard Ashford was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. The damage had been done, and the memories would never fade. Despite everything, I had found a sense of purpose. The support group grew, and together we forged connections, helping one another heal. I shared my experiences, not just as a survivor but as someone who had faced the darkness head-on. I learned to channel my fear into strength, to face the world with a renewed sense of vigilance. As the years passed, I continued to live my life, haunted but no longer paralyzed by fear. The shadows of my past still lingered, but they no longer held power over me. I had faced the horror, confronted it, and emerged on the other side with a commitment to ensuring that no one else would suffer in silence. It was a rainy Friday evening in Austin, Texas, a perfect setting for curling up on the couch with a good movie and a delicious pizza. After a long week of endless meetings and work deadlines, I felt like I had earned it. The thought of sinking my teeth into a hot slice of pepperoni made my mouth water. I pulled out my phone and quickly dialed my favorite local pizzeria. "Thanks for calling Giuseppe's. How can I help you?" The cheerful voice on the other end pulled me from my thoughts. "Hi. I'd like to place an order for a large pepperoni pizza, please," I replied, excitement bubbling in my chest. "Sure thing. That'll be about 30 minutes. We'll see you soon." I hung up, anticipation coursing through me as I made my way to the living room, where I had already set up my cozy movie corner. The rain drummed rhythmically against the window, creating a soothing background for my evening plans. As the clock ticked away, I found myself lost in thought, occasionally glancing at the door, eager for the arrival of my meal. 30 minutes passed like a blur, and just as I was starting to wonder if I should call to check on my order, there was a loud knock on the door. I rushed to answer it, the smell of rain-soaked earth filling my nostrils as I flung open the door. Standing there was a young man, drenched from the rain, a wide smile plastered across his face. His name tag read, Jake, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Pizza delivery," he announced, holding out the pizza box as if it were a trophy. "Thanks," I replied, taking the box from him. My fingers brushed against the cardboard, and I noticed it felt unusually warm. "This is really hot," Jake chuckled, his grin still intact. "We keep our pizzas hot and fresh, just for you." As I handed him cash, he lingered at my doorstep. "Hope you enjoy your meal." His cheerful tone felt slightly unsettling, but I dismissed it, thanking him again before closing the door. Once inside, I set the pizza on the table and opened the box, expecting the delicious aroma of melted cheese and savory pepperoni. Instead, I was met with a strange, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. My heart raced as I leaned in closer, inspecting the pizza. Embedded in the cheese were dark specks that looked almost like insects. I recoiled in horror, the taste of something rotten filling my mouth before I even took a bite. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. Maybe I was just imagining things. I grabbed a slice, the warmth radiating from it, and took a hesitant bite. As the flavors hit my tongue, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The texture was gritty, unlike any pizza I had ever eaten. Panic bubbled within me as I pushed the slice away. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound outside my window. It was a soft tapping, almost like fingernails on glass. My heart raced as I turned to look, but there was nothing there, just the rain pouring down, creating a hazy curtain outside. I brushed off my unease, trying to focus on the pizza again. With a deep breath, I grabbed the pizza box, feeling the sweat bead on my forehead. I glanced down at the mess of toppings, and that's when I noticed it, an odd piece of paper that had slipped from beneath the box. I picked it up, my heart pounding. In shaky handwriting it read, "You should have eaten it all." A chill ran down my spine. Who had left this note? My thoughts spiraled into a frenzy, each worse than the last. I glanced at the pizza once more, then back at the window, dread creeping into my bones. Had I really seen Jake outside? Panic began to rise in my throat as I slammed the pizza box shut. I turned to retreat to the safety of my living room when I heard the tapping again, this time louder and more insistent. I froze, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. As I peered out the window, I caught a glimpse of Jake standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, watching me. His eyes glinted in the dim light, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I quickly pulled the curtain shut, heart racing as I backed away from the window. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, pacing the room. The rain continued to fall outside, the sound intensifying, echoing in my mind. I needed to get a grip. I forced myself to breathe deeply, attempting to rationalize the situation. Maybe Jake was just waiting for me to finish my meal before he left. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I turned on the television, hoping to distract myself. The flickering light illuminated the dark corners of my apartment, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't concentrate on the show, my thoughts drifting back to the pizza, the note, and Jake's unsettling presence. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning on the couch, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and I hoped a moment on the porch would clear my head. As I opened the door, the damp air hit me like a wave, and I stepped onto the porch, glancing around nervously. The street was empty now, a quiet calm settling over the neighborhood. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my racing heart. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. It was coming from the kitchen. I frowned, glancing back at the door, but the darkness felt heavy and oppressive. Cautiously, I stepped back inside, drawn toward the sound. As I approached the kitchen, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. My stomach knotted with anxiety. I reached for the light switch, but my hand trembled as I flicked it on, revealing an empty room. The tapping ceased, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I took a deep breath and turned to walk back to the living room, but as I turned, something caught my eye, a shadow moving across the kitchen floor. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the front door, but it swung open before I could reach it. Jake stood there, his eyes wide with a manic excitement that sent chills down my spine. "Did you like the pizza?" he asked, his tone unnervingly cheerful. I stumbled back, fear coursing through me. "What are you doing here?" "You scared me." He chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "I just wanted to make sure you enjoyed it. I put a special ingredient in it just for you." His smile widened, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too perfect. "Get away from me!" I shouted, trying to push past him, but he grabbed my arm, his grip firm and unyielding. "You shouldn't have left it unfinished," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I broke free from his grasp and bolted toward the hallway. I could hear him laughing behind me, a sound that echoed in the silence. I ran to the bathroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, desperate to catch my breath. I could hear Jake's voice outside, muffled but still menacing. "You can't hide from me. I know you're in there." Fear wrapped around me like a vice, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. I could feel the walls closing in, the shadows lurking just beyond the door. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I call for help? But my phone was dead, and the landline felt so far away. Suddenly, I heard a soft scratching sound, like fingernails against the door. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. Come out, wherever you are!" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. I felt the panic rise again, my throat tight with fear. I could hear him moving around outside, pacing like a predator stalking its prey. I had to escape. Gathering all my courage, I slowly opened the window and climbed out, hoping to find a way to safety. I dropped to the ground, the wet grass softening my fall. I quickly glanced around, desperate for an escape route. The rain had picked up again, drenching me further as I crouched low, moving toward the neighbor's yard. Just as I thought I was in the clear, I heard a voice calling my name, sending a chill down my spine. "Why are you running?" "I just wanted to be friends." My heart raced as I glanced back, catching a glimpse of Jake standing in my yard, looking eerily calm, his eyes fixated on me. He didn't seem deterred by the rain. If anything, he looked invigorated. I turned and sprinted toward the street, my feet pounding against the pavement. I ran for what felt like an eternity, my breath ragged, the sound of the rain drowning out my thoughts. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him right behind me. But the street was empty. The only sound was the steady drumming of the rain against the asphalt. Finally, I reached the corner of my street and paused, desperately scanning my surroundings for any sign of life. The neighborhood was silent, the only movement coming from the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and I knew I couldn't just stand there. I spotted a light in the distance, an all-night convenience store a few blocks away. My instinct to run kicked in again, and I darted toward it, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The rain pelted my face, but I pushed forward, driven by the primal urge to find safety. As I reached the store, I shoved the door open and rushed inside, nearly colliding with a shelf stacked high with snacks. The bell above the door jingled, and the store clerk looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, glancing at my drenched clothes and wild eyes. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. There's a guy. He's been following me." My words tumbled out in a rush, fear making it hard to form coherent sentences. The clerk's brow furrowed with concern. "Do you want me to call the police?" "Yes, please," I replied, nodding vigorously. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, but as he spoke to the operator, I felt a creeping sensation in the pit of my stomach. What if Jake followed me here? What if he knew where I was? "Just stay calm," the clerk said, his voice steady. "Help is on the way." I nodded, but my eyes darted to the door, expecting to see Jake burst through at any moment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the weight of his gaze still heavy on my back, even though he wasn't there. The clerk ended the call and turned to me, his face serious. "They're sending someone over. Just hang tight." I stepped back from the counter, trying to regain my composure. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting harsh shadows that danced across the aisles. I paced, my mind racing as I replayed the events of the evening in my head. How had things spiraled so quickly? A simple pizza delivery turned into a nightmare, and I felt like I was trapped in a horror movie. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the ticking clock in the store amplifying my anxiety. The rain continued to drum against the roof, a constant reminder of the chaos outside. I glanced at the clerk, who was now watching the door with a wary expression. Then, just as I was about to lose my nerve, the door swung open, and a police officer stepped in, drenched but determined. "What's going on?" he asked, scanning the store before fixing his gaze on me. I rushed forward, pouring out my story in a flurry of words, explaining about the pizza, the strange note, and Jake lurking outside my house. The officer listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "Okay, let's take this seriously. Can you describe him?" he asked, his pen poised over a notepad. I did my best, recounting every detail, the way Jake smiled, the unsettling excitement in his voice, and the sharpness of his features. After taking down my information, the officer assured me they would investigate. "We'll patrol the area and see if we can find him. But I want you to stay here for now. It's safer." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. My body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline, and I was acutely aware of every sound: the rain tapping against the window, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the distant sirens in the night. The officer stepped outside, leaving me alone with the clerk, who tried to offer some comforting words. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "You're safe now." But I didn't feel safe. I paced again, anxiety gnawing at me as I waited. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching into eternity. The feeling of dread returned, creeping up my spine like icy fingers. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled, and I turned to see a familiar figure step inside. My heart dropped as I recognized Jake, his expression eerily calm, a smile plastered across his face. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice almost cheerful. "I just wanted to be with you." "No! Stay away from me!" I screamed, backing away, my mind racing with the realization that he had followed me. "Why are you scared?" Jake took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as if he found my fear entertaining. "I thought we were friends." The clerk rushed to my side, raising his hands. "Sir, you need to leave. This isn't a place for you." Jake chuckled softly, the sound sending chills down my spine. "I just wanted to make sure she got my message," he said, pointing at me. "Your message? You mean the note?" The clerk's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Yes, the one that says you should have eaten it all," Jake replied, still smiling as if we were having a casual conversation. "Get out!" the clerk shouted, stepping in front of me protectively. Jake's smile faded, replaced by a glint of something dark and sinister. "You're ruining everything!" He lunged forward, but the clerk grabbed a baseball bat from behind the counter and swung it at Jake, who barely dodged in time. "Call for backup!" the clerk yelled at me, and I scrambled for my phone, frantically dialing 911 once more. The tension in the store escalated, and I felt the air thicken with fear. Jake's eyes were wild now, anger etched on his features as he eyed the clerk. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I could hear the sirens in the distance, growing closer, and I knew help was on the way. The clerk kept his stance, bat raised, ready to protect me at any cost. "Stay back," he warned Jake, his voice steady despite the situation. But Jake just laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the store. "You think you can protect her? She belongs with me." In that moment, the door burst open again, and 2 police officers rushed in, guns drawn. "Hands in the air!" one of them shouted, and Jake froze, his smile fading as he realized he was outnumbered. "Jake! Step away from her!" the other officer commanded, and for a moment silence filled the room. "Why don't we talk about this?" Jake said, his voice eerily calm, but his eyes glinted with madness. The officers moved closer, trying to assess the situation, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. The clerk stepped back, letting the police take control, while I remained rooted to the spot, fear still coursing through my veins. "Get on the ground!" one officer shouted, and without hesitation, Jake lunged toward the door, but the officers were quick. They tackled him to the ground, the sound of struggle filling the store. I watched, breathless, as they restrained him, cuffing his hands behind his back. "You're under arrest," one of them said, his voice steady as they pulled him to his feet. As Jake was led outside, he turned to me, a crazed look in his eyes. "You can't escape me! I'll always be watching!" he shouted before the door closed behind him. The reality of what had just happened crashed over me, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. The officers approached me, concern etched on their faces. "Are you okay?" one of them asked gently. I nodded, tears streaming down my face as I finally felt the tension begin to ease. "I think so. I just don't understand how this happened." "You're safe now," the other officer reassured me. "We'll take care of him, and we'll make sure he can't get to you again." As I left the convenience store, the rain had turned to a gentle drizzle, the world feeling fresh and new. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, but deep down, I knew that the shadows of this experience would linger for a long time. I returned home, the warm light spilling from my windows welcoming me back. I locked the door and leaned against it, grateful for the safety of my home. But as I settled onto the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake's words would haunt me forever. "I'll always be watching." Days turned into weeks, and while Jake was in custody, I felt the effects of that night lingering in my mind. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow in my home. Every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed, my heart raced, expecting the worst. Evenings were the hardest. The dark nights crept in, bringing with them the memories of fear and panic. I stopped ordering takeout, terrified that I might open the door to find Jake's familiar face again. My once cozy home felt like a cage, and I spent more time looking over my shoulder than enjoying the comforts of my own space. One night, I decided I needed to confront my fears. I lit candles around the living room, casting a warm glow that chased away the shadows. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts, trying to gather the courage to reach out to friends. But my hands trembled, and I ultimately put it down. Then, a sudden knock at the door shattered the silence. My heart raced and I froze. I didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the better of me. I tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. A figure stood on the porch, but it wasn't Jake. With a sigh of relief, I opened the door to find a pizza delivery guy. I couldn't help but laugh, realizing how ridiculous I had been. "I'm so sorry!" I exclaimed. "I just had a rough few weeks." He smiled, handing me the pizza. "No worries. It happens. You should see some of the reactions I get on my deliveries." As I took the pizza, I felt a sense of normalcy returning. "Thank you," I said, closing the door and setting the pizza on the table. I grabbed a slice, taking a bite, savoring the cheesy comfort of my favorite meal. Later that night, I settled onto the couch, feeling more at ease than I had in weeks. The flickering candlelight danced around the room, creating a soothing atmosphere. I flipped through channels until I landed on a documentary about true crime. As the stories unfolded on the screen, I found myself captivated, strangely comforted by the idea of bringing light to darkness. It felt empowering to watch others confront their fears and take control of their narratives. I realized that while Jake's threat would always linger in the background, it wouldn't define my life. I turned off the TV and went to bed, the night air feeling crisp and refreshing. I knew I would still have to confront my anxiety and fear, but I was ready to take small steps forward. After all, I had faced my demons, and though they had shaken me, I was still standing. As I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, "You're stronger than you think." Embracing the comfort of my home, ready to reclaim my life. Delivering pizzas was supposed to be straightforward. I'd been doing it for a few years now, and aside from the occasional weird customer, it was usually a pretty mundane job. However, that night, things took a turn I never expected. The clock struck 11 p.m. as I received the order. A large pepperoni and a side of cheesy bread, the usual late-night craving. The address sent shivers down my spine, an old house on the outskirts of town. It looked like something out of a horror movie. The place was rumored to be haunted, and I had always avoided it. But it was late, and I needed the money. As I pulled up to the driveway, rain pattered against the windshield, and the wind howled ominously. The house loomed ahead, its chipped paint and sagging porch giving off an eerie vibe. Flickering lights illuminated a cracked window, barely revealing the silhouette of a woman inside. I hesitated, heart pounding, but pushed the thought aside. After all, I was just delivering pizza. I grabbed the hot box, took a deep breath, and approached the door. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter coming from inside. Shaking my head, I knocked on the door, the sound echoing into the night. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with long, disheveled hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. She wore a simple white dress, though it looked slightly tattered, as if she had been wearing it for ages. There was something unsettling about her smile, too wide, too eager. "Hi there," she said cheerfully. "You must be my pizza delivery boy. Come in, come in." I was taken aback. No one ever invited me inside. I can just leave it here," I replied, attempting to keep my voice steady. "Nonsense! It's chilly out there. You're getting soaked." She gestured for me to enter, and before I could protest, I found myself stepping inside the house. The interior was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls, and the air smelled of mildew and something sweet, sickly sweet. Old photographs lined the walls, depicting smiling faces from long ago, but their eyes seemed to follow me. I felt an uncomfortable chill creep up my spine. "Where should I set the pizza?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. My instincts screamed at me to leave. "Right over here," she said, leading me to a small table cluttered with mismatched candles. "I've been waiting for someone to share this meal with me. I rarely get visitors." The place felt claustrophobic, and the flickering candles cast ghostly shadows on her face. I wanted to get out of there, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was her gaze, intense and penetrating, as if she could see right through me. "Is everything okay?" I ventured, sensing the atmosphere grow heavier. "Oh, everything is just lovely," she replied, her smile widening. "But I've been feeling a bit lonely." "Do you ever get lonely?" I shrugged, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Sometimes, I guess. Loneliness can drive one to madness, you know," she mused, her tone suddenly somber. "People forget how to connect. They lose themselves in the noise of the world. It's a shame." The conversation took a dark turn, and I felt my heart race. "Right, your pizza's hot," I said, trying to shift the focus back to something light-hearted. She chuckled softly, an unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. "Hot? Just like my appetite." There was a moment of silence, and her eyes locked onto mine, her expression shifting from cheerful to something more intense, almost predatory. "I think I should be going," I said, backing away toward the door. The atmosphere in the room thickened, as if the shadows were closing in around me. "Stay a little longer," she insisted, stepping closer. "You're so fascinating. I can feel your energy. It's so vibrant." Her voice took on a hypnotic quality, and I felt the urge to escape surge within me. "I really can't," I stammered, trying to sound firm. "I have other deliveries to make." "Other deliveries?" she repeated, tilting her head. "You can always come back, you know. I won't bite, unless you want me to." Her laughter echoed, a sound that resonated with madness. I was horrified. The way she spoke sent alarm bells ringing in my head. "I really have to go now," I insisted, my voice trembling as I reached for the doorknob. As I opened the door, she stepped in front of me, blocking my exit. "What if I told you that you could experience something incredible? Something beyond your wildest dreams?" Her eyes glinted with a manic intensity, and I felt a rush of panic. "No, thank you!" I shouted, shoving past her and sprinting out into the rain. I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys as the rain soaked me to the bone. I glanced back, and to my horror, she stood in the doorway, watching me with that unnerving smile. It was a haunting image etched in my mind. I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to get away from that house. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment I thought I saw her reflection staring back at me, her face twisted in a grin. I sped away, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of a well-lit diner in town. I rushed inside, my heart racing, trying to shake off the memory of that woman. I told my coworkers about the encounter, but they just laughed it off, thinking I was trying to pull a prank. Yet, deep down, I knew I had escaped something far more sinister than a lonely woman craving company. For the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. Every time I delivered a pizza, I half expected to see her standing in another doorway, waiting for me to return. The laughter of my coworkers echoed in my mind, but I couldn't help but feel there was more to that night than I understood. Days turned into weeks, and the unease lingered. Then, one night, I received another order from the same address. My heart sank. I hesitated, contemplating whether to accept it or not. But bills needed to be paid, and I was desperate for the money. I drove to the house again, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. The rain started again, tapping rhythmically against the windshield, mirroring my racing heart. As I approached, the silhouette of the house loomed ominously, and the same flickering light danced in the window. This time, I was prepared. I was going to drop off the pizza and leave without engaging with her. I knocked firmly, bracing myself for whatever would come next. The door swung open, and there she was, exactly as I remembered, long hair, wide smile, and eyes glimmering with an unsettling energy. "Back for more?" she asked, her voice sweet like honey but laced with something darker. "I just have your pizza," I said quickly, holding it out as if it were a shield. "Why don't you come in and have a slice?" she suggested, stepping closer. "I promise it's safe, this time." I could see something lurking behind her smile, an unspoken hunger that made my skin crawl. "No, thanks. I really can't." As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You can't keep running away. You're part of this now. You feel it, don't you? The connection?" I ripped my arm away and sprinted back to my car. The laughter rang in my ears as I drove off, the headlights illuminating the darkness behind me. This time, I knew for certain that I wasn't just dealing with a lonely woman. There was something deeper, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Weeks passed, but the feeling of dread never left. I started looking for another job, desperately wanting to escape my ties to that house. Every night I dreamed of her, her smile twisting into a grotesque grin as she beckoned me to join her. Finally, I landed a new job at a local grocery store, and the thought of delivering pizzas became a distant memory. But one night, I found myself restless and unable to sleep. I glanced at my phone and saw that I had a message from an unknown number. "Let's meet again. I miss our little chats. Your favorite customer." My stomach dropped as I recognized her words. I deleted the message, but it didn't erase the feeling of being trapped in her web. From that day on, I kept my phone close, always expecting another message, another encounter. I had escaped her grasp, but I could feel the tendrils of her presence still lingering in my life. Every day, I told myself I was free, but deep down, I knew the truth. I could never truly escape the last delivery.